you've already learned the passive voice of the present system, and you realize that that's pretty easy, that all it is a matter of changing the endings. And you're still going to use the same tense marker and stems. The passive voice of the perfect system is a little bit more complicated, in part because instead of just changing the endings, we've got to use an entirely new stem. We've got to use an entirely new principal part. Now, just as a reminder, what we refer to by the perfect system is the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect indicatives, and the perfect and pluperfect subjunctives. And the present system referred to the present and imperfect and future. That is, the present system is formed off the first two principal parts. The perfect system is formed off the last two principal parts. So in our verb ago, agere, egi, actus, the perfect system is going to use these last two principal parts, and in particular the perfect passive system is going to use exclusively this fourth principal part. Now, the key to the perfect passive system is realizing that this is a compound form. That is, there are going to be two parts, two separate parts to the verb. The first part is the perfect passive participle. You might remember from English grammar that a participle is a verbal adjective, and as an adjective, the participle in Latin is an adjective as well. As an adjective, it's going to match the noun it's modifying in gender, number, and case. So it's going to match the subject, because that's what the verb is modifying. Match the subject in gender, number, and case. Generally, the case is going to be nominative since your subject is nominative, but there are a few instances, constructions where that might not be the case. So you've got your perfect passive participle, and then you're going to have a form of sum, a form of to be. And this form of to be is going to match your subject in number, in person and number. Just like all your verbs have up till now. So if the subject is I, I'm going to use the first person singular. If the subject is they, we're going to use third person plural. Now this might seem very complicated, but the good news is that all verbs conjugate the perfect passive system the same way. So if you know how to do it for the first conjugation, you'll know how to do it for the second, third, and fourth conjugations. So let's take a look at the perfect passive indicative. We'll use woco, wocare, wokawi, wokatus to call, and the first person singular, wokatus sum. And in fact, don't think that it has to come in this order necessarily. We could put the sum first, sum wokatus. This is just a standard way of doing it. So wokatus, wokata, wokatum. And just for clarity, to clarify, I give the masculine, the feminine, and the neuter because remember, this participle, wokatus, wokata, wokatum, has to match the subject. So wokatus sum. So I would say, I have been called, wokatus sum, I being masculine, so wokatus sum. But if I were feminine, if I were a woman, I would say wokata sum, I have been called. Second person singular, wokatus aum es. Third person, wokatus aum est. Plural, we have to change our participle to the plural. So wokati, wokatai, wokata sumus. Keep in mind that this participle is a first and second declension adjective. All perfect passive participles are first and second declension adjectives. So wokati, wokatai, wokata sumus. Wokati, wokatai, wokata estis. Wokati, wokatai, wokata sunt. So, what do we keep in mind here? First, the participle must match the subject in gender, number, and case. And second, we're going to use a present form of sum, sum es est, sumus estis sunt, a present form of sum to form the perfect passive. This may seem counterintuitive, but trust me, this is the way it is. The perfect aspect of it is here found in the participle. So let's take a look at a couple of examples on how this might work. So if I wanted to say the boy has been called, or the boy was called, boy has been called, the boy was called. Subject is puer. He's masculine and singular, so we're going to use vocatus, and he's nominative. Puer vocatus, and because it's third person singular, puer vocatus est. But if we were to say the girl is called, or has been called, rather, girl has been called, puella, and because the subject now is no longer masculine and singular, but feminine singular, we're going to use puella vocata est. And the same idea would follow if we were to say the men are called. The men have been called. Weary, and now our subject is masculine, plural, and nominative. So weary vocati sunt. Right? Vocati, masculine, nominative, plural, because our subject is masculine, nominative, plural. And then it's a third person plural. But if I were to say we have been called, right? And we, let's say, is masculine, we would say vocati sumus. But if we referred to a group entirely made of women, it would be vocati, plural, feminine, sumus. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. Let's keep moving on. The pluperfect passive indicative is formed very much in the same way. We're going to use, so our example here is ago, agere, egi, actus. The pluperfect passive, we're still going to be focusing on this fourth principal part, the perfect passive participle. In the singular, we're going to use a singular form, actus, acta, actum, masculine, feminine, or neuter, depending on our subject. But instead of the present of sum, we're going to use the imperfect of sum. Eram, so actus eram, actus eras, actus erat. And in the plural, still going to shift over, right? Our nominative plural, acti, acti, acta, eramus, acti, acti, acta, eratus, acti, acti, acta, erant. So, if we wanted to say that the dogs were driven, ago, let's say canes, masculine, acti, or rather, erant. This is pluperfect. So canes, acti, erant, the dogs had been driven. Canes, acti, erant. Or the deeds, the gifts had been driven. Dona, neuter plural, dona, acta, erant. The gifts had been driven. Okay, so keep in mind that your participle must match the subject in gender, number, and case, and the tense of your form of to be is going to determine the tense of the verb, of the passive voice. The future perfect, here are the examples, habeo, habere, habui, habitus, to have. Again, we're going to use our third principal part, or rather our fourth principal part, a perfect passive participle. Make sure it matches in gender, number, and case. And then we're going to use the future of sum. Habitus ero, habitus eris, habitus erit. And in the plural, habiti erimus, habiti eritus, habiti erunt. So you'll see at this point it's very, very useful to have your forms of sum memorized, your present, imperfect, and future. So if we wanted to say the dog will have been held, the dog, canis, is masculine singular, habitus erit. The dog will have been held. But if we were to say the gifts will have been held, dona, neuter plural, dona, habita, erunt. Or if we want to say the girl will have been held, puella, feminine singular, huella habita erit. Okay, so again, your participle must match your subject in gender, number, and case. The form of to be will match in person and number. Quickly say something about the subjunctives, the perfect passive subjunctive. Very, very similar to what you've already done. Perfect passive participle, but instead of using the present indicative form of sum, we're just going to use the subjunctive of sum. So, habitus sim, habitus sis, habitus sit, habiti simus, habiti situs, habiti sint. And for space's sake, if the subject were feminine, we would say habita sit. Or if it were masculine plural, feminine, habitai sint. Feminine plural, habitai sunt. All right? So the only difference between the perfect passive indicative and the perfect passive subjunctive is the indicative will use the indicative of sum, the subjunctive of sum. And the pluperfect passive subjunctive, same thing. Here, mitto, mittere, misi, missus, to send. So, fourth principal part. And instead of the imperfect indicative of sum, we use the imperfect passive, or the imperfect subjunctive of sum. So, sm, remember to form the imperfect subjunctive, you take the second principal part, the infinitive, and you just add the endings. So, missus sm, missus ss, missus esset, missi essemus, missi essetus, missi essent. To wrap up, the things to keep in mind with the perfect passive system. You have to make sure that the gender, number, and case of the perfect passive participle matches the subject. Right? That perfect passive participle is just an adjective. It's matching the subject in gender, number, and case. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that the present tense of sum in conjunction with the perfect passive participle will give us the perfect tense. The imperfect of sum in conjunction with the perfect passive participle will yield the pluperfect. And the future of sum in conjunction with the perfect passive participle will give us the future perfect.